What if the story you thought you knew about Meghan Markle's first marriage was only half of the truth? What if the whispers you've seen online, the comments on forums, the shady headlines in tabloids, weren't entirely random? They were part of a narrative carefully constructed over years, one that began long before Meghan became a household name. Today, we're diving into a story that is rarely told in full, a story shrouded in silence, speculation, and rumors that refuse to die. It's a story about a young actress, a Hollywood producer, and a marriage that ended quietly, yet left echoes that followed her into royalty. And yes, we will address the claims that have circulated about Meghan's personal health, the ones that shock even the most seasoned rumor trackers. But we'll do it with caution, clarity, and context, because nothing in this video is asserted as fact. What you're about to hear is the history of the claims, the patterns, and the aftermath, and why people continue to talk about it today. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine being young, ambitious, and navigating the glimmering yet unforgiving world of Hollywood. You're in your early 20s, full of energy, determination, and a belief that love and career can coexist. For Meghan Markle, life in those years was a delicate balancing act. She had just started making a name for herself in television, dabbling in roles that were meaningful yet modest, far from the global scrutiny she would face later. And in the midst of this, she met Trevor Engelson, a producer, a name in industry circles, and someone who seemed to share her drive and ambition. From the outside, they looked like a match made in Los Angeles, two young professionals carving out careers in the competitive Hollywood landscape. Their relationship, by most accounts, was intense but private. Public appearances were few. Social media was only beginning to dominate celebrity culture, and they managed to maintain a bubble around their personal lives. Friends described the pair as supportive of one another, navigating long hours on set, networking events, and industry pressures. Yet behind the closed doors, the story that would later explode in rumor and speculation was quietly taking shape. What we know of those years comes from fragments, interviews with friends, industry anecdotes, and the occasional social media hint, but nothing official. And in those fragments, we see the beginnings of the narrative that would later define how some people remember Meghan's first marriage. The marriage itself was brief. By Hollywood standards, not entirely unusual, but what made it unusual wasn't the length, it was the silence that followed. Divorce filings were made, legal proceedings concluded, and yet neither Meghan nor Trevor gave extensive public statements. This silence was interpreted in countless ways. Some saw it as discretion, a mature handling of a personal matter. Others saw it as suspicious, a gap begging to be filled with stories, rumors, and speculation. And fill it they did. Once the public eye noticed a lack of explanation, the imagination ran wild. And as often happens, the most sensational versions of the story gained traction. Among the claims that spread online, one of the most persistent involved Meghan Markle's reproductive health, specifically rumors that she had experienced a medical issue in her early 20s. These claims, repeated in forums, gossip sites, and occasionally in tabloids, were never substantiated by any credible source. No medical records were produced, no verified statement confirmed them. Yet, in the vacuum created by silence, the claim gained a life of its own. It became part of the narrative tapestry surrounding Meghan, shaping perceptions and influencing conversations about her personal and professional trajectory. But it's important to pause here and ask, why do such stories stick? Why do unverified claims about health, especially about young women, become enduring narratives? And why do we, as consumers of media, continue to treat them as potentially true even without evidence? This is where context becomes essential. Hollywood is an environment in which image, perception, and rumor operate as currencies. Discretion is often mistaken for secrecy, and silence is often interpreted as guilt or confirmation. Trevor Engelson, for his part, remained largely silent. Interviews were rare, and any commentary he gave rarely touched on personal matters. Silence, in this context, did not equal admission, yet the rumor mill treated it as such. Meanwhile, Meghan was navigating a career trajectory that would eventually bring her into the global spotlight. Every prior rumor, every whispered story, became ammunition for media outlets and social commentators eager to tell a compelling narrative. And so, what began as a quiet, private divorce became something entirely different, a story that would follow her for years, morphing with every retelling. But there's more to this story than just the rumor itself. There's also the question of timing. Why did these claims surface when they did? Why did they become associated with particular narratives about Meghan's ambitions, her choices, and her trajectory toward royalty? To understand this, we have to consider the environment of celebrity gossip, social media amplification, and cultural fascination with the personal lives of public figures. Every unverified claim is a potential headline. Every quiet statement is a prompt for speculation. And in Meghan's case, the combination of Hollywood experience, rising fame, and eventual entry into the British royal family created the perfect storm for rumors to spread and persist. This video is not about proving or disproving personal claims. It is about examining the narrative, who told it, why it spread, and how it has influenced perceptions. By exploring the context of Trevor Engelson's silence, the structure of Hollywood gossip, and the nature of online rumor propagation, we can begin to see why certain stories, no matter how unverified, persist. This is not just Meghan Markle's story. It's a case study in how modern celebrity culture interacts with gender, health rumors, and narrative construction. So, why should you care about this story today? Because understanding it helps illuminate larger patterns of media consumption, rumor creation, and the ethics of public discourse. When we consume stories about public figures, especially ones involving unverified personal or medical details, we participate in a cultural system that can elevate, distort, or permanently alter reputations. By analyzing this specific example in detail, we see the mechanisms behind rumor survival and the consequences of repeated speculation. And in the case of Meghan and Trevor, it's not just a story about a past marriage. It's a window into the forces that shape public perception, the consequences of silence, and the power of unverified narratives. But this is only the beginning. Because before the divorce, before the rumors, before the silence became so deafening, there was a young couple navigating love, ambition, and the pressures of early adulthood. There were moments that seemed ordinary, trivial even, but which would later be interpreted through a lens of speculation and judgment. And there were choices made, small decisions, conversations in private, that, while mundane at the time, now seem almost prophetic when viewed in retrospect. As we move into the main chapters of this story, we will dissect these early years, explore the marriage in detail, and examine the moment when the rumor first appeared in public consciousness. We will investigate Trevor Engelson's response, or lack thereof, and the ways in which silence and media amplification created a narrative almost independent of the individuals involved. Along the way, we'll ask uncomfortable questions. How much do we really know? How much do we want to believe? And how do rumors, once set in motion, become almost impossible to stop, even when there is no proof? Because what comes next is where the story truly becomes fascinating. The quiet divorce, the hushed speculation, the whispers on forums and in comment sections, they are only the surface. Beneath them lies a series of cultural patterns, narrative strategies, and psychological mechanisms that explain why a single unverified claim about a young woman's health could follow her across continents and decades. And as we peel back each layer, you will see the story in a new light. Not just as gossip, but as an intricate case study in rumor creation, media amplification, and the ethics of storytelling. By the end of this video, you will have a deeper understanding of the forces at play. You will see why silence is powerful, why speculation is seductive, and why, in the absence of verified information, the human mind fills in the blanks with the stories it wants, or fears, to be true. And while we will explore rumors, claims, and speculation in depth, you will also see how these narratives are constructed and maintained, and why even the quietest statements, or the lack thereof, can have massive consequences. Because, ultimately, the story of Meghan Markle and Trevor Engelson is more than a tale of a brief marriage. It is a story about narrative, perception, and the enduring impact of unverified claims. It is a story about how a single rumor, repeated over time, can shape reputations and influence public opinion. And it is a story that continues to echo in media and conversation today, a cautionary tale for anyone navigating the world of celebrity, rumor, and scrutiny. So stay with us, because what comes next will take you behind the scenes of a young Hollywood marriage, reveal the moments that led to silence, and explore how a single unverified claim became one of the most persistent rumors in modern celebrity history. And just when you think you've heard it all, the next chapter will show how the story took a turn that no one saw coming, and how silence, speculation, and the relentless appetite for drama combined to create a narrative that persists to this day. What was Meghan Markle's life really like before the world knew her name? Before headlines, before paparazzi flashes, before whispers of royal scandal and internet speculation. To understand the story of her first marriage, the divorce, and the rumors that followed, we need to start at the very beginning. And I mean that literally. The period in her life when she was just a young woman navigating her 20s, trying to balance ambition, relationships, and personal identity in a city that rewards image and punishes distraction. Imagine Los Angeles in the early 2000s, a city of dreams and desperation, where the streets pulse with ambition and everyone seems to know someone who knows someone. For a young actress trying to break into television, this was a world of constant auditions, late-night table reads, and fragile reputations. Meghan Markle was one of many in this crowd, but she carried herself with a confidence that set her apart. She wasn't a star yet, but she was ambitious, intelligent, and driven. Her focus was on her craft, her career, and slowly carving out a niche in a competitive industry. And somewhere along the way, she met Trevor Engelson. Trevor was a producer, a man familiar with the rhythms and politics of Hollywood. He had industry connections, a sense of how projects moved from concept to screen, and a charm that made him approachable yet enigmatic. To outsiders, he seemed like the perfect complement to Meghan, someone who understood the business side of her world, someone who could relate to the pressure she faced, someone who could hold space for both ambition and personal connection. Friends who knew them at the time described the relationship as close and supportive. They spent time together away from cameras and social media, enjoying ordinary moments that would later be mythologized in the public imagination. And yet, even in these early days, the seeds of speculation were quietly planted. Hollywood is a world that thrives on stories. Relationships, particularly those between rising stars, are rarely private for long. There is a tendency, almost instinctual, to narrativize every interaction, every date, every quiet conversation. And when the story involves a young woman with ambition, intelligence, and charisma, the speculation can take on a life of its own. In Meghan and Trevor's case, the silence of their private life, what they kept to themselves, would later be interpreted in countless ways. Silence became a canvas, and the public painted on it. But before we jump ahead to divorce and rumor, it's important to understand the texture of these early years. Meghan's life was not a series of dramatic, headline-grabbing events. It was punctuated by auditions, small roles in television series, and the ongoing challenge of sustaining a relationship while chasing a dream. There were late nights on set, early mornings and script readings, and weekends stolen away for quiet companionship with Trevor. This was a period of normalcy, of ordinary ambition, and yet, retrospectively, every ordinary moment would be scrutinized, every decision reframed in the narrative of what came next. Their relationship had a rhythm, a private order that outsiders rarely glimpsed. Weekends might involve hiking, dinners at local restaurants, or attending intimate industry parties. They supported each other professionally, cheering on small successes, offering advice, and sometimes offering comfort after rejections or setbacks. They were, in many ways, a couple navigating the pressures of young adulthood, of building a life in a city that constantly tested resilience and patience. Yet even in this ordinary intimacy, there were dynamics that would later be dissected in tabloids and online forums. Career trajectories, for instance. Meghan's path was rising, slowly but steadily, while Trevor's career had its own ups and downs, typical of producers balancing multiple projects. Friends observed that Meghan sometimes seemed more ambitious, more focused, and more restless than her partner. Small tensions existed, subtle and private, never publicized but always present. In hindsight, these tensions would later be interpreted through the lens of rumor, early signs of inevitable conflict. It's crucial to remember, however, that none of this, at the time, signaled anything extraordinary. Relationships are complex. Young people in Hollywood are complex. Ambition, success, and personal growth naturally create friction. And yet, when Meghan and Trevor's relationship ended, all these normal dynamics were suddenly reframed as evidence, proof, or explanation for a narrative that no one could verify. The quiet years became a puzzle piece for stories that would later be written not by participants, but by observers eager for sensationalism. Even in these early days, Meghan's life was layered with dualities. She was private but visible, ambitious but navigating societal expectations, focused on her career but attentive to her personal life. And this tension between private identity and public perception would become central to the narrative that later surrounded her. Hollywood demanded image. The media demanded scandal. And in the absence of either extreme, the rumor mill filled the gaps. Trevor Engelson, too, was navigating similar pressures, albeit differently. As a producer, he was accustomed to discretion in professional matters, but perhaps less prepared for the intense scrutiny that personal life could invite. His silence, routine during the relationship, would later be interpreted as something deliberate, conspiratorial, or confirming the rumors that began to circulate. In reality, he was simply being private, something that in Hollywood is often misread, exaggerated, and weaponized. Friends recall moments of normalcy, quiet dinners, laughter at inside jokes, long walks, support during career setbacks. These were ordinary human moments, yet in retrospect, they became part of a larger mythos. Every detail was ripe for reinterpretation, every anecdote a potential hook for headlines. And as Meghan's star began to rise, the retrospective gaze intensified. Fans, critics, and media outlets alike began to analyze, speculate, and reconstruct the past in ways that were rarely fair or accurate. This is where we see the first lessons about rumor dynamics. Silence invites speculation. Privacy becomes a narrative vacuum. Ordinary moments are magnified and transformed into plot points. What seems trivial in context can seem explosive in retrospect. And in Meghan and Trevor's case, this dynamic was already at play well before the marriage ended. It is also worth noting that social media was beginning to change everything during this period. Forums, blogs, and early celebrity gossip sites allowed stories to circulate rapidly, often without verification. Anonymous tips, half-truths, and recycled rumors became part of the collective imagination. And when a couple like Meghan and Trevor stepped out of the spotlight, the absence of explanation was read as a statement in itself. The world began to fill in the blanks, and that is how whispers become persistent narratives. Yet despite all this speculation, the couple lived their lives largely unseen. There were no scandals, no legal battles, no publicized fights. There were two young adults, trying to find love while pursuing their ambitions. And it is precisely this ordinariness that made their story so vulnerable to exaggeration later. Because when the world wants a story, it often ignores nuance in favor of drama. Ordinary reality is less compelling than rumor, and so whispers began to emerge, first quietly, then louder as years passed. By understanding these formative years, we gain perspective on what came next. The divorce, the rumors, and the speculation were not isolated incidents. They were part of a continuum that began in ordinary life. The context, the dynamics, the pressures. All of it shaped the narrative vacuum that later allowed speculation about Meghan's personal and medical life to gain traction. And while some of these claims were shocking, the real story is not simply the rumor itself. It's the machinery that made the rumor possible. So, as we move into the next chapter, keep this question in mind. How does ordinary life transform into extraordinary rumor? How does silence, discretion, and privacy get reframed as evidence of hidden truths? And how did the early years of Meghan and Trevor's relationship, marked by normalcy, laughter, and shared ambition, become the foundation for stories that would follow them for decades? Because the divorce, the rumors, and the unverified claims are only part of the picture. The first chapter of this story is about context, about understanding the ordinary before it became extraordinary, and about recognizing the human complexity behind headlines and speculation. And as we turn the page into the marriage that didn't fit the narrative, you'll see how what seemed private and simple at the time would later be interpreted in ways neither Meghan nor Trevor could have anticipated. What happens when a marriage appears perfect on the surface, but the world senses tension beneath? That's the question many asked about Meghan Markle and Trevor Engelson's union, though very few truly knew the reality behind closed doors. To the casual observer, their wedding seemed like a Hollywood love story. A beautiful young actress, a successful producer, a romantic ceremony. But appearances, as we know, can be deceiving. And in this case, the very image of perfection would later collide with silence, speculation, and the rumors that still echo today. The wedding itself was discreet yet picturesque, a ceremony that reflected their desire for privacy but also acknowledged their connection to Hollywood culture. Close friends and family attended, and while it wasn't an extravagant celebrity spectacle, it had all the hallmarks of a couple deeply in love. This was not a marriage that needed public validation. It was a personal commitment, and for a time, it seemed like exactly that. The couple exchanged vows, shared laughter and tears, and took the first steps toward a life together. On paper, it looked like any other young couple starting out. Yet beneath the surface, there were dynamics that didn't align perfectly. Career pressures played a subtle but significant role. Meghan was rising steadily in television, pursuing roles that demanded flexibility, travel, and focus. Trevor, too, had his professional commitments, juggling multiple projects and navigating the unpredictable world of production. Balancing two ambitious careers is challenging in any context, but in Hollywood, where image, opportunity, and timing are everything, the stakes were higher. Friends noted that the couple sometimes struggled to align priorities, to carve out personal time amid professional demands. These challenges were not unusual, yet they became magnified in retrospect. When the marriage ended, observers looked back and tried to assign meaning to every decision, every misalignment, and every absence. Why did Meghan pursue roles that took her away from home? Why did Trevor focus on projects that demanded long hours? In ordinary life, these are normal pressures. In the context of celebrity speculation, they became evidence, clues in a narrative that suggested inevitable conflict. And that is where the story begins to twist. Ordinary life is reinterpreted as drama, and the mundane becomes fodder for rumor. Social circles, too, played a role in shaping perception. Friends and colleagues sometimes offered interpretations of the couple's dynamic that weren't entirely accurate, yet these comments found their way into the gossip ecosystem. Casual remarks about differences in ambition, personality, or lifestyle were reframed as insight into marital discord. Once the rumor mill had a foothold, it could reinterpret ordinary moments as confirmation. A quiet dinner with friends could become secretive behavior. A canceled date could become evidence of strain, and a delayed career move could be proof of underlying tension. Even the couple's private interactions, those small gestures of love and support that outsiders never saw, were swept aside. Intimate moments, shared laughter, and mutual encouragement, the fabric of any relationship, were ignored in favor of speculation. In Hollywood, and increasingly in the digital age, the absence of scandal is rarely as compelling as the suggestion of drama. And so, as the marriage progressed, the narrative began to form. A union that looked fine, but somehow, somewhere, something was wrong. It is also important to consider personality dynamics. Meghan was ambitious, driven, and increasingly focused on building a public career that reflected her values and aspirations. Trevor was supportive, but his focus and temperament sometimes differed. Friends noted subtle frictions, moments of disagreement that were normal in any relationship, but when magnified in retrospect, these became framed as proof of incompatibility. And here is a critical point. Narrative construction often relies on exaggerating small differences. Ordinary friction becomes dramatic tension, and the audience, hungry for story, consumes it eagerly. By the time the marriage was underway, Meghan's trajectory was already shifting toward higher-profile roles, international visibility, and eventual global recognition. Trevor, meanwhile, continued his work behind the scenes, maintaining a lower profile. This imbalance in public attention, combined with ordinary marital pressures, created a story template that would later be interpreted as the marriage that didn't fit. In reality, It was likely a marriage like many others. A mix of love, ambition, compromise, and normal challenges. But perception matters as much as reality when the world is watching or thinking it is. So how did this marriage go from ordinary to extraordinary in the public imagination? The answer lies partly in timing and partly in silence. The couple kept personal matters private. They did not invite media scrutiny, nor did they provide the kind of public narrative that can preempt speculation. And in Hollywood, silence is often read as secrecy. A quiet marriage becomes mysterious. An absence of commentary becomes evidence of something hidden. The more they remained private, the more the story around them grew in the public imagination. Adding fuel to the fire, there were external pressures typical of ambitious young couples in Los Angeles. Family expectations, professional obligations, and social dynamics all create stressors that, in ordinary circumstances, are manageable. But when magnified by rumor, social media chatter, and public speculation, they become magnified. Every small disagreement, every decision about time, travel, or career focus is reframed as a key plot point in a narrative that may have little grounding in reality. During the marriage, Trevor and Meghan reportedly tried to maintain balance. Friends spoke of shared meals, vacations together, and moments of connection that showed affection and partnership. Yet, even these glimpses of normalcy were not immune to reinterpretation. When the marriage ended, these memories were recast by the public imagination into clues, as if each moment held hidden meaning, foreshadowing, or confirmation of rumors that would later arise. And this pattern, the retroactive imposition of drama onto ordinary life, would set the stage for the persistent speculation that followed. It is also worth noting that the early years of marriage were formative for both individuals. They were learning not only about each other, but about how to navigate complex social, professional, and personal landscapes. Conflicts, compromises, and negotiations over priorities are natural in any partnership, particularly when both individuals are ambitious and driven. Yet these ordinary processes were later stripped of nuance and reframed as signs of a marriage doomed to fail, feeding the narrative that the public eventually consumed as fact. As we examine the period of the marriage that didn't fit the narrative, a critical theme emerges: the difference between reality and perception. The couple may have faced normal challenges, but the combination of public curiosity, rumor propagation, and the eventual silence following their divorce transformed private life into a public narrative. A marriage that appeared typical from the inside became, from the outside, a story waiting for explanation, interpretation, and, ultimately, speculation. Which brings us to the next point: the divorce itself. Because no matter the normalcy of their early marriage, the moment it ended, the quiet, private handling of separation created a void. And in that void, speculation thrived. Questions emerged. Why did it end? Was there conflict? Were there medical or personal issues? And how did a marriage that seemed so ordinary suddenly become the focus of whispers and rumors that continue to circulate today? Because what came next would take a private, seemingly ordinary relationship and transform it into a story with layers, complexities, and claims that had little to do with what actually occurred behind closed doors. And once the rumor machine began, the silence itself became the loudest part of the narrative. The marriage that didn't fit the narrative was, in reality, probably not remarkable at all, just two young adults navigating life, love, and ambition. Yet perception, timing, and the absence of explanation transformed it into a story that the world could not resist. And as we move into the next chapter, we'll examine how the quiet divorce, combined with this narrative vacuum, set the stage for the rumors that would later dominate headlines and online discussion. Divorces happen every day. In fact, in Hollywood, they happen all the time. But not every divorce becomes the subject of rumor, speculation, and intense public scrutiny years after the fact. Meghan Markle and Trevor Engelson's divorce is one of those exceptions. What should have been a private, straightforward legal process instead became a story that invited questions, assumptions, and whispers that persist to this day. And understanding why requires looking closely at the timing, the silence, and the narrative vacuum created by two people who, at the time, were simply trying to move on with their lives. The marriage, as we've explored, had been outwardly ordinary, marked by shared ambition, mutual support, and private intimacy. But by Hollywood standards, the pressures of dual careers, public attention, and personal growth can create friction that slowly becomes untenable. Friends and acquaintances reported that Meghan and Trevor were, for the most part, careful to keep disagreements private, navigating normal relationship challenges without attracting media attention. Yet when divorce proceedings began, the lack of explanation provided by either party left a void. And in that void, rumors rushed in to fill the silence. Legally, the divorce followed standard procedures. There were filings, dates, and paperwork, steps typical of any dissolution of marriage. No unusual claims were publicly recorded. There were no allegations of misconduct, infidelity, or scandal in the official filings. By conventional measures, it was straightforward. Yet, the world rarely judges divorces by official records alone. People are drawn to the gaps, to the questions unanswered, and to the silence of those involved. And in the case of Meghan and Trevor, the silence was deafening. This silence, intentional or not, became a catalyst for speculation. Trevor Engelson, in particular, maintained a low profile. He did not give interviews detailing the reasons for the split. He did not provide a public narrative to counter speculation. And Meghan, already focused on expanding her career, also did not speak publicly about the divorce. This mutual discretion, while understandable and arguably mature, was interpreted in countless ways. Some assumed guilt, others assumed tragedy, and still others created elaborate theories that sought to explain an event for which no one outside the marriage had concrete evidence. The absence of commentary created fertile ground for online forums, tabloids, and social media to craft their own narratives. In a world increasingly reliant on digital gossip, a quiet divorce is a story waiting to be written. Observers began to piece together timelines, read between the lines of public appearances, and speculate on interactions that may have had no relevance to the actual reasons for the split. Every canceled engagement, every social media post, and every carefully curated photograph became a potential clue. And in this environment, the rumor that would later capture headlines, the alleged medical issue, found its footing. It's critical to note here that rumors are rarely created spontaneously. They are constructed in the space left by silence and uncertainty. And the Meghan Markle and Trevor Engelson narrative was a textbook example. The lack of public disclosure created what psychologists call a narrative vacuum. Humans are wired to seek explanations. When facts are scarce, speculation fills in the gaps, often with dramatic, emotionally compelling, or sensational elements. And in this case, the speculation touched on intimate and highly personal aspects of life, fueling the rumor machine further. Friends and acquaintances later recounted that the couple was committed to handling the divorce privately. They were concerned about media intrusion, unwanted attention, and the potential impact on professional opportunities. Their discretion, understandable as it was, inadvertently contributed to the mythologizing of their split. Because in the absence of facts, imagination becomes authority, and rumors, no matter how implausible, gain traction. Another factor was timing. Meghan's career was accelerating. Roles in television series were becoming more significant. Visibility in Hollywood circles was increasing, and the public was beginning to take notice of her in ways that exceeded her prior experience. When a young woman begins to stand out in a competitive industry, every personal choice becomes a topic of public conversation. Add in the divorce, and suddenly ordinary events were magnified, interpreted, and repeated in ways that no one involved could control. It is also worth examining the role of media logic in this process. Tabloids and gossip outlets operate on immediacy, speculation, and drama. Facts alone rarely sustain attention. Headlines require tension, mystery, or revelation. A quiet divorce in Hollywood, particularly one involving a rising actress, is an invitation for interpretation. In such an environment, even ordinary explanations are insufficient to satisfy the appetite for narrative. Consequently, silence is treated as a sign of concealment, and the lack of information is treated as a story in itself. And that is precisely what happened with Meghan and Trevor. Their silence, combined with the natural human inclination to create stories, allowed narratives to emerge that had little to do with actual events. Anonymous tips, social media speculation, and recycled gossip all contributed to the mythos surrounding the divorce. Once a rumor appears, it has a way of propagating independently, often detached from reality, feeding into a cycle of repetition and amplification that is hard to reverse. This is also where the controversial claims regarding Meghan's alleged health issue first began to surface in whispers online. While there is no verified evidence, no medical records, and no confirmed statements, the rumor gained momentum because of the vacuum left by silence. It became a narrative placeholder, a reason for the divorce in the minds of those constructing stories without direct knowledge. The human mind, craving explanation, often prefers a dramatic story to uncertainty. And so, in the absence of facts, speculation becomes a perceived truth, repeated and reinforced through gossip, forums, and social media discussion. It is crucial to distinguish between documented events and speculation. The divorce itself is documented. Filings, dates, and procedural steps exist. But the motivations, private conversations, and personal dynamics remain largely unknown to the public. And in this unknown space, rumor thrives. Any story that claims to provide absolute explanation for the divorce must be treated with skepticism. Yet, paradoxically, this is exactly the type of story that captures public attention, precisely because it purports to reveal a hidden truth. The divorce also highlights a broader pattern: the intersection of gender, power, and media narrative. Young women in public life often face scrutiny regarding their personal choices in ways that men do not. Every action, decision, or perceived misstep can be reinterpreted through a lens of criticism or speculation. In Meghan's case, the divorce provided a canvas for narratives that connected personal decisions with unverified claims, amplifying the story beyond ordinary bounds. The combination of public interest, professional visibility, and the absence of official commentary created a perfect storm for speculation to thrive. By examining the divorce and the surrounding circumstances, we see a pattern that is repeated in celebrity culture. Ordinary events, when left unexplained, become stories. Silence becomes a catalyst. Normalcy is reframed as drama, and speculation fills the void left by discretion. This is a recurring theme in the way narratives are constructed and disseminated in modern media. And in the case of Meghan Markle and Trevor Engelson, it set the stage for rumors that would persist for years, influencing public perception in ways that neither party could control. As we move into the next chapter, we will trace the origins of the most persistent rumor, where it first appeared, how it spread, and why it became central to discussions about the divorce. Because the divorce, as quiet and private as it may have been, did not occur in a vacuum. It occurred in a world eager for stories, a world where absence is interpreted as evidence, and a world where unverified claims can gain a life of their own. Rumors have a strange life of their own. They rarely emerge fully formed. Instead, they start as whispers, half-heard comments, and anonymous tips, gradually building momentum until they feel like facts. The rumor surrounding Meghan Markle's first marriage and her alleged medical issue is a textbook example of this phenomenon. Understanding where it first appeared and why it gained traction requires looking beyond headlines and into the murky world of gossip, blind items, and online speculation. It's important to remember that nothing in this chapter is verified. There is no medical record, no official statement, no confirmed source. What we are examining is the evolution of a narrative, how it started, who repeated it, and how it shaped public perception. Because once a rumor begins, reality often becomes irrelevant. Repetition, dramatization, and amplification are what give it power. The earliest traces of this particular rumor appear in Hollywood gossip circles in the mid-2000s, shortly after Meghan and Trevor's divorce. Anonymous tips, often packaged as blind items, suggested that there was more to the split than the public knew. These items were cryptic, offering tantalizing hints without evidence. A young actress's first marriage ended under unusual circumstances, they would read. Details were vague, but the implication of a personal, sensitive issue was clear. Audiences were intrigued, even though there was no confirmation and no corroboration. Forums and online discussion boards quickly picked up these blind items. Internet culture thrives on speculation, and early gossip sites allowed users to share, dissect, and embellish stories with little accountability. What starts as a single anonymous comment can morph into a narrative repeated across multiple platforms, each iteration adding a layer of drama. In the case of Meghan and Trevor, the rumor transformed from a quiet whisper into a widely circulated talking point. Users debated, speculated, and filled in the blanks with details that were never verified. And the more it was discussed, the more it gained the appearance of credibility, even in the absence of evidence. One key factor in the rumor's early propagation was the lack of official commentary. Trevor Engelson remained private, giving few interviews and providing almost no insight into the marriage or divorce. Meghan, at the time focused on her acting career, also maintained discretion. This mutual silence created what experts call a narrative vacuum, a space where the public's imagination could run unchecked. In this vacuum, rumor doesn't just survive, it thrives. The very act of not addressing the rumor can be interpreted by some as tacit confirmation, even though it may simply reflect a desire for privacy. Media outlets, both mainstream and tabloid, began referencing these whispers with caution, often framing them as allegations or claims. Some outlets went further, weaving them into broader narratives about Meghan's life, her choices, and her early career. By connecting these unverified claims to a public figure who would later become a global celebrity, the rumor gained a wider audience. It moved from obscure gossip forums into articles, listicles, and eventually, social media commentary. Each repetition reinforced the perception that there was some truth to the story, even though verification was absent. Psychologists explain this phenomenon as the illusory truth effect. The more we hear something, even if it's not verified, the more likely we are to believe it. Repetition, combined with the credibility we assign to sources that appear informed, creates the illusion of fact. In the case of Meghan Markle, the combination of anonymity, blind items, partial coverage in media, and widespread discussion online created a perfect storm. A rumor that may have started as a vague whisper now had momentum. People began to treat it as at least partially plausible, despite the lack of evidence. Interestingly, the nature of the rumor itself played a role in its stickiness. It was personal, dramatic, and emotionally charged. Stories involving health, particularly reproductive health, are inherently compelling because they touch on vulnerability, identity, and societal taboos. They provoke strong emotional reactions, which increases sharing, discussion, and engagement. In other words, the content of the rumor itself made it highly shareable, ensuring it would propagate even faster than a typical piece of gossip. The rumor also leveraged gender dynamics common in celebrity culture. Young women in the public eye are frequently subject to scrutiny about their bodies, choices, and personal lives. Claims about medical issues or reproductive challenges feed into broader narratives about perceived fragility, vulnerability, or even moral judgment. In Meghan's case, the rumor aligned with cultural expectations and biases, which helped it spread. Even without verification, the story felt coherent within existing societal narratives, making it easier for people to accept and repeat. As the rumor circulated, it also became intertwined with other claims about Meghan's first marriage. Observers and online commentators began to link the alleged medical issue to the divorce, implying causation where none was proven. This is a classic example of narrative construction. Discrete facts, or perceived facts, are connected into a story that seems complete, even though each component is speculative. The marriage, the divorce, and the alleged personal health challenge were reframed as a single storyline, creating a compelling, dramatic arc for audiences to follow. What is striking about the early spread of this rumor is how quickly it moved from obscurity to prominence. Within a few years, it was cited, debated, and referenced repeatedly across different platforms. Each iteration added subtle embellishments, timelines, personal details, and motivations, none of which could be verified. The rumor effectively became self-reinforcing, as new participants treated it as common knowledge, thereby legitimizing it in the eyes of others. The cycle of repetition, embellishment, and social validation ensured that the story would not die quietly. But why did it continue to gain traction, even as Meghan's career evolved? Part of the answer lies in timing and context. As Meghan began taking higher-profile roles, gaining visibility on television, and eventually entering the global spotlight. The public's interest in her past intensified. Every previous detail, no matter how minor, was suddenly seen through a new lens. The rumor, which had once been obscure, now seemed relevant, pressing, and newsworthy. Social media amplified this effect as audiences debated, shared, and theorized about her past with renewed intensity. Another factor was the reluctance of both Meghan and Trevor to engage publicly on the matter. Their silence, understandable from a personal and legal standpoint, was interpreted by some as evasive or confirming. The media and online communities are quick to fill voids in public statements. If an individual does not deny or clarify, the story often grows. In this case, the absence of commentary became part of the rumor's momentum. By examining where and how the rumor first appeared, we can see the mechanics of modern celebrity speculation in action. Anonymous tips, blind items, online forums, repetition, gendered biases, and the amplification of social media combined to create a narrative that seemed credible to many, despite a complete lack of verification. The story's compelling content, personal, dramatic, and emotionally charged, ensured it would propagate rapidly, drawing attention from audiences hungry for intrigue. As we move into the next chapter, we will examine the specific claims surrounding Meghan's alleged medical issue and analyze what is actually known, what remains unverified, and why these claims persist in public discourse. Because the emergence of the rumor is only the first step. Its survival, amplification, and endurance tell us far more about the culture of celebrity gossip, audience psychology, and narrative construction than about the personal lives of those involved. When a rumor persists long enough, it begins to take on a life of its own. For Meghan Markle, one of the most persistent and controversial claims centers on her alleged medical issue during her early 20s, a claim tied to her first marriage with Trevor Engelson. Let's be clear from the start. There is no verified evidence, no medical documentation, and no official statement from Meghan or her representatives confirming this claim. What we are examining here is the nature of the rumor, how it emerged, and why it continues to circulate despite lacking confirmation. Understanding this requires not only looking at the rumor itself, but also at the cultural, psychological, and media mechanisms that have allowed it to survive. The rumor first surfaced in the aftermath of Meghan and Trevor's divorce, circulating initially through gossip forums, blind items, and early social media threads. Anonymous posts hinted at a personal challenge in Meghan's early life that had allegedly influenced her marriage. These posts were vague, offering tantalizing details without verification. The ambiguity made the story flexible. It could be interpreted, exaggerated, and repeated in different contexts, allowing each iteration to add layers of drama. What is striking about this claim is its specificity combined with ambiguity. On the one hand, it references a deeply personal aspect of health, something that is both sensitive and highly compelling to audiences. On the other hand, it provides no specifics that can be corroborated. The combination of specificity and vagueness is a hallmark of effective rumor. It feels detailed enough to be believable, yet elusive enough to resist verification. People are drawn to it because it seems shocking, intimate, and consequential, even in the absence of proof. From a psychological perspective, this rumor taps into several human biases. First, there is the availability heuristic. People give more weight to information that is vivid, emotional, or memorable. Health-related claims about reproductive ability are highly emotional, which makes them more likely to be remembered and repeated. Second, there is the confirmation bias. People are more likely to accept information that fits pre-existing narratives or assumptions. For those who already believe there must have been an extraordinary reason behind Meghan and Trevor's divorce, the claim becomes self-validating. Third, repetition plays a critical role. The more a rumor is repeated across forums, articles, and social media, the more it feels credible, regardless of evidence. It's also important to note the cultural context. Women in public life are frequently scrutinized regarding their bodies, health, and reproductive choices. Rumors of medical challenges, particularly reproductive issues, carry a cultural weight that makes them more sticky. They evoke sympathy, curiosity, and even moral judgment, all of which fuel discussion and amplification. In Meghan's case, These gender dynamics intensified the rumor's persistence. A claim that might have faded in another context was amplified because it touched on culturally charged themes that audiences found irresistible. Despite its persistence, nothing about this claim has been confirmed. There are no hospital records, no statements from medical professionals, and no credible insider accounts verifying it. Trevor Engelson, who has been largely silent about the details of the marriage and divorce, has not confirmed or commented on this particular aspect. Meghan herself has also remained private, never addressing the claim publicly. The absence of confirmation does not make the rumor false, but it does mean that it should be treated with caution and skepticism. Yet the story has survived and evolved. Early blind items were vague. Later accounts repeated the claim with increasing specificity. Some articles implied causal links between the alleged medical issue and the divorce, even though no evidence exists to substantiate such a connection. This is a classic example of narrative reinforcement. Once a rumor exists, each retelling can add details, assumptions, and interpretations that make the story feel more complete, even as the factual basis remains absent. Another factor in the rumor's endurance is its adaptability. The claim has been framed in different ways depending on the audience and the context. In some forums, it is presented as a tragic personal challenge. In gossip sites, it is framed as a scandalous revelation. In social media threads, it becomes part of broader narratives about Meghan's early life, her ambitions, or her eventual trajectory into the royal family. This adaptability allows the rumor to survive across platforms, contexts, and years, making it difficult to completely dislodge from public perception. It is also worth considering the role of curiosity and emotional engagement. The alleged medical claim is not just a detail. It is a story element that invites empathy, shock, and speculation. People are naturally drawn to stories that involve struggle, vulnerability, or hidden truth. The rumor satisfies this craving, giving audiences a behind-the-scenes glimpse into a private life they cannot access. And in doing so, it gains traction independent of evidence, propelled by engagement and interest rather than verifiable facts. Finally, we must look at how the claim interacts with broader narratives. In the public imagination, Meghan's early marriage is often framed as a precursor to her later, highly visible life. Any dramatic or mysterious element in that marriage, real or alleged, becomes part of the larger story. The medical claim, by virtue of its emotional weight and secrecy, fits perfectly into this framework. It provides a lens through which some observers interpret her decisions, relationships, and even her public persona. The result is that a single unverified claim can influence perception far beyond the original context in which it appeared. So what do we actually know? The facts are few. Meghan Markle and Trevor Engelson were married, they divorced, and both largely remained private about the details. Beyond that, everything else is speculation, rumor, or interpretation. The alleged medical claim exists in repeated whispers, blind items, and unverified accounts, but nothing confirms it. Its persistence demonstrates not the truth of the claim itself, but the power of narrative, repetition, and cultural context in shaping public perception. As we move to the next chapter, we will examine the role of silence, Trevor Engelson's silence, Meghan's discretion, and the media's interpretation of both, and how silence itself becomes a powerful narrative tool. Because in this story, what was unsaid mattered as much, if not more, than what was said. And what comes next will show how discretion, privacy, and unverified claims combine to create one of the most enduring rumors in celebrity culture. Silence is a curious thing. It can be a shield, a sign of strength, a mark of discretion, or, in the eyes of the public and media, it can be a weapon that cuts deeper than words ever could. In the case of Meghan Markle and Trevor Engelson, silence played a critical role in shaping the narrative surrounding their marriage, divorce, and the persistent rumors that followed. Understanding why silence becomes a weapon requires examining both human psychology and the media ecosystem, where what is unsaid often matters more than what is said. First, consider human psychology. People naturally seek explanations. When events are ambiguous or information is scarce, the mind fills in the gaps. This is called the ambiguity effect, where uncertainty is uncomfortable and the brain seeks to reduce it, often by creating narratives that may or may not be accurate. Silence in response to significant life events, such as a divorce, creates the perfect environment for speculation. The less you say, the more the world assumes. And assumptions, as we've seen, are fertile ground for rumor. Trevor Engelson's approach after the divorce exemplifies this phenomenon. As a Hollywood producer accustomed to managing information in professional contexts, he likely saw no reason to publicly explain private matters. He maintained discretion, avoided interviews about the divorce, and focused on his career. This is reasonable and arguably wise from a personal standpoint. But to the public, the silence was interpreted in countless ways. As confirmation of scandal, as evidence of hidden truths, or as tacit acknowledgement of claims like the alleged medical issue. Meghan Markle's silence had similar effects. Even before her rise to international prominence, she rarely spoke about the divorce, her marriage, or any personal challenges she may have faced. From a privacy perspective, this is understandable. From a narrative perspective, it left the story entirely in the hands of outsiders, journalists, and online communities. Her silence became a canvas onto which speculation was projected, each observer interpreting absence as meaning, intention, or confirmation. Silence also gains power in a media landscape built on immediacy and storytelling. Headlines demand drama. Social media rewards curiosity. The less someone says, the more a story thrives. For every unanswered question, a dozen narratives emerge. The media often interprets silence as secrecy, and secrecy is a hook. Clicks, views, and attention follow. In this way, discretion is weaponized by the ecosystem itself. It's not that silence is inherently harmful. It is that the environment transforms it into drama. The timing of Meghan and Trevor's silence amplified its impact. Their divorce occurred before Meghan became a globally recognized figure. Once she rose to international visibility, the silence of her past was retroactively interpreted with newfound scrutiny. Every choice she made, career, relocation, personal life, was analyzed in light of the divorce and the alleged rumors. The narrative vacuum created years earlier now became a lens through which audiences interpreted her present. Silence had not only preserved the privacy of the past, it had inadvertently constructed a storyline that persisted and evolved over time. Another element of silence as a weapon is the way it interacts with human curiosity and cognitive bias. The Zeigarnik effect suggests that people remember uncompleted or unresolved stories more vividly than completed ones. An unanswered question, why did the marriage end? Was there a personal challenge? Remains lodged in the mind, demanding resolution. Rumors, speculation, and unverified claims satisfy this mental need, giving the impression that the story has been explained, even when it hasn't. In other words, silence doesn't merely protect privacy. It primes the imagination to fill gaps with drama. Media culture compounds this effect. Journalists and content creators, particularly in celebrity reporting, often prefer unanswered questions over fully explained stories. Mystery drives engagement. A discreet divorce, a private individual, and a lack of direct statements form the perfect narrative environment. Each retelling of the story emphasizes what is unknown, creating suspense, curiosity, and, inevitably, the persistence of rumor. Silence, in this context, is a fuel, not a barrier. This phenomenon is amplified when the rumor itself is emotionally compelling, as is the case with Meghan's alleged medical claim. Silence allows speculation to flourish because audiences naturally seek patterns, causation, and narrative arcs. They ask, could the divorce have been caused by this personal issue? Did the silence indicate shame, discretion, or concealment? Every unanswered question reinforces the story, regardless of its truth. The consequences of silence as a weapon are significant. For Meghan, it meant that even ordinary decisions, her career trajectory, public appearances, or private choices, were interpreted through a speculative lens. For Trevor, it meant that his discretion was similarly reframed as deliberate concealment or complicity in the rumor's perpetuation. And for the public, it created a narrative that felt complete, even though it was constructed on a foundation of incomplete information. Silence also interacts with memory and repetition in fascinating ways. When a rumor is repeated over time, the association between silence and confirmation strengthens. Each retelling makes the connection between the unverified claim and the subject feel more plausible. By refusing to publicly address or confirm allegations, the individuals involved inadvertently allow the story to solidify in collective consciousness. The very act of not speaking becomes part of the narrative, interpreted as evidence in and of itself. Yet silence is not just passive. It can be strategic. Choosing not to respond to rumor protects personal boundaries, preserves dignity, and avoids giving attention to potentially harmful claims. Meghan and Trevor's silence may have been a deliberate shield, a way to prevent the story from growing in intensity while maintaining personal and professional focus. The paradox, however, is that in a culture hungry for stories, even protective silence can be transformed into a dramatic signal, weaponized by interpretation and imagination. Ultimately, silence as a weapon is less about intent and more about perception. In the case of Meghan Markle and Trevor Engelson, it amplified the story of their divorce, provided fertile ground for rumors, and ensured that certain narratives, especially the alleged medical claim, remained in circulation. Silence preserved privacy, but also magnified speculation, demonstrating the complex interplay between discretion, media, and public perception. As we move into the next chapter, we will explore the role of media amplification, how gossip outlets, forums, and social media escalated these whispers into persistent, widely circulated narratives. Because while silence sets the stage, amplification ensures the story will not fade quietly. Silence sets the stage. Curiosity fills the gaps. But it is media amplification that transforms whispers into a story the world can't ignore.